A year after the show was launched, Pat Weaver, who was then president of NBC, decided to air your show on the full NBC network.
Yes, I'll always be grateful to Pat for that decision.
How did that come about?
Well, I guess he was just looking at the show from time to time. I don't think for the first few months we were on there he even knew we were. It was not his business to check local stations. He was a network thinker and doer, and a very good one, too. But as it happened, he already had a big hit with the Today Show, which is still successful in the morning, of course. So inevitably, he or some member of the programming department would have thought, oh, how about a late show called The Tonight Show? It's just the opposite end of the calendar, the clock. So I don't think he had anything more than a title in mind, and eventually, I'll never know until he writes his memoirs what other possibilities might have occurred to him, but none of them ever saw the light of day because he just called us up one day, spoke to our producer, Bill Harback, said, I like that show that you guys are doing, and how would you all feel if we put it on the network? So naturally, we were all overjoyed. And the only practical change that was made, the only important change, was it was no longer called the Steve Allen Show. Then we had to go with the title Tonight, and I was willing to do that. In fact, years later, the full title would be The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. End of title. I never thought of that, or didn't really give much of a damn if I had. Everybody knew who I was, and they knew it was with Johnny Carson or Donald Duck or Steve Allen or whoever was the host. But it was called Tonight. And only later did the phrase The Tonight Show come to pass.
What did this mean to you, going from a local show to network? What were your feelings?
Well, it took a load off my mind because I had just come from several years of network experience, both in radio and in television. And as I've earlier mentioned, it was definitely a step down to come off the highly prestige network work into a lowly local program. However, I never had any grand ambitions in those days, or subsequently for that matter. Whatever happened, you can't control the universe, so sometimes you take whatever you can get. And also, whatever you can do, whether you're great at brain surgery or motorcycle maintenance, whatever it is, there's something in you that wants to do that. And if it pays well, so much the better. So New York is not Pocatello, and just to be on the air in New York was a big deal, capital A, capital B, capital D.
But now you were going to the whole country.
Yeah, but as I say, I had for years been talking to the whole country already, so it was suddenly a new universe to me. It was getting restored back to my former level, whatever would be appropriate. And of course, it was a pleasurable move, and it's much better to be on whatever the number of stations was, 157 instead of 1.
How many people did you reach? Do you have any idea? How many millions?
I never did know, nor does anybody know in scientifically precise terms, but you can tell in, round millions or hundreds of thousands. So, of course, you're talking to a vastly larger audience. Although in those days, what is true even now was, I suppose, even more true then, that America basically goes to bed about 10:30 because they have to be up on the farm at 6 or at the factory at 7:30. And even now, any night when a late-night show considers itself happy with its ratings, it's talking to a very tiny percentage of the American people. So that was a given. I didn't worry about that. And sure enough, when they finally later would put us into prime time, then we had access to 30 to 40 million people on some hot nights.
Did NBC put any kind of program restrictions on you, material-wise?
On The Tonight Show, when it went network, no. What they did was make some suggestions. Why they bothered with suggestions at all when the show was already a hit, and the very success of it is what led them to put it on the network. But I can understand that. A network is your toy when you're the boss, and I guess you can't resist tinkering with your toys. Also, I had learned enough about life at that time never to close my mind to any suggestions. You must always entertain them. Then later you can say, hey, that's great, we'll do that, or that is stupid, I'll fight that to the death. And unfortunately, the few practical suggestions they made were in that latter range. I'll be specific. The first shock, at least in terms of memos and meetings, came to us when they said, now we'd like to add I think they mentioned 3-minute segment each night. So I'm waiting for the end of the sentence. I thought, maybe 3 minutes of great stuff. What is it? They said ski condition reports. And Billy Harback and I and the others looked at each other and kept our faces deliberately blank. It was really a dumb idea. So I said in my responding memo, have you gentlemen done any research as to what percentage of the American people give a damn about skiing? I said, it's a lovely sport. I have nothing against it. More people should ski, but very few do. And even of those, on any given night, they're not too likely to be going skiing. So what do they care whether there's light powder at Stowe or something at Steamboat Springs, So nevertheless, it was their network, and for, I don't remember how long, it seems to me about 2 weeks, poor Gene Rayburn, who was our announcer, actually stood in front of a blackboard and gave ski condition report. Now, this would come out of half an hour of screaming comedy and hot jet, and suddenly the audience in the studio was, is he talking about snow? Who gave a damn? Well, they finally realized they'd made a dumb suggestion, and we dropped that. The other suggestion was not that dumb. Abstractly, it's not a bad idea, but in practical terms, it was a bad idea. Suggestion number 2 was we will have a resident critic, sort of like Gene Shalit in the morning, and he will come on and give you little 2-minute reviews of all the great Broadway shows that open. Now, it sounds like a good idea, but I had to actually point out to these gentlemen who were running the major network in the world, in the great city of New York, that the great Broadway opening nights are few and far between. Something opens almost every night, and it's pretty lousy. But how many nights are there when Oklahoma opened, or South Pacific, or, from here to whatever? So, nevertheless, they assigned a critic to the show, a very nice fellow. I think his name was Bob Joseph, if I'm not mistaken. He was a personal friend, a social friend. But charming camera work was not his area of expertise. He was basically a writer, a good critic, as far as I ever knew. But his personality was not ideally adapted to television, and most nights he had lightweight fare to talk about, and many a night nothing whatever to talk about. So again, there was about a 2 or 3 week embarrassing period, and then they dropped that suggestion.
Did you go to that as an area of satire at any time?
I was tempted, but since it would have been satirizing my own show or being personally rude to poor Bob, no, I didn't do anything of that sort. I held my own counsel, as we say, and the thing finally fell off the wagon of its own weight.
Well, did the network have script approval?
I don't know. The philosophical question was never put to me directly, but I knew that they had in those days men I wish they had more of today when they could really use it. What's the technical term?
Program practices?
Program practices and whatever. They're the censors. They don't like to use that word, but that's what they are. And I think we need them now. Where are they when we need them? Because in those days, nobody ever tried to say a 4-letter word on television or show frontal nudity or anything else that they do now. And consequently, I guess the fellows with the blue pencils occasionally, just to justify their salaries, really used to come up with some dumb suggestions, but very little with our show. First of all, not that much of it was written. And sometimes what censoring there was had to do with commercial considerations. For example, if your sponsor was Chesterfield, nobody could say, well, that was certainly lucky, even if you're talking about a lucky stick or something. So there was a little of that, but that's understandable. Show business is a business, and I never argued about that. I thought, okay, we won't say lucky on this show.